If you're watching this right now, stop scrolling for just a moment because this story begins with a sentence no parent is ever prepared to hear. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't dramatic. It was cold, casual, and sharp enough to cut straight through 63 years of love. Don't call me anymore. I'm tired of you. Those words came from my son, and in that moment, something inside me quietly shattered. My name is Betty, and for most of my life, I believed motherhood was permanent, unbreakable. I believed that no matter how far a child drifted, a mother's place in their heart stayed intact. I believed love was enough to survive neglect, distance, even cruelty. I was wrong. I raised my son, Daniel, alone in a small Ohio home after his father walked out when Daniel was 7. I worked double shifts as a nurse, missed birthdays, skipped vacations, and came home exhausted because that's what mothers do. We sacrifice, we endure, we don't keep score. Daniel grew up. College, marriage, a life of his own. I was proud. That's the dream, isn't it? But somewhere along the way, the relationship changed. Calls stopped being conversations. Visits stopped being visits. Everything became a request. Money for rent, money for repairs, money for emergencies that never seemed to end. And every time I said yes, because saying no felt like failing as a mother. Then came the day I called him, not for money, not for help, but because I was scared. My doctor had ordered tests. I just wanted to hear my son's voice. Instead, I heard irritation. "What is it now, Mom?" I tried to explain. I tried to soften my voice. I tried to remind him who I was. That's when he said it. "Don't call me anymore. I'm tired of you and your requests." My requests. I sat in my kitchen long after the line went dead, staring at photos of a child who once reached for my hand like it was safety itself. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I went silent. Days passed, then weeks. I went to appointments alone. I celebrated good medical news alone. I learned what loneliness actually feels like, not the absence of people, but the absence of being wanted. And then, after 2 months of silence, my phone rang. Daniel's name flashed on the screen, and everything I believed about love, family, and motherhood was about to be tested. But what I said next, no one saw coming. Stay with me, because part 2 begins with the call that forced me to choose between being a mother and finally choosing myself. The call after the silence. Before we begin, take a second to support this channel. If stories about real life, boundaries, and hard choices matter to you, subscribe now. You don't want to miss what comes next. After 8 weeks of silence, my phone ringing felt unnatural, like a sound from a past life I thought I'd already buried. I stared at the screen. Daniel. Not son, not my boy, just a name. That alone told me something had changed. I answered, not because I missed him, but because I needed to know why the silence had finally broken. "Mom," he said, breathless, urgent, "we really need your help." No apology, no hesitation, no acknowledgement of the last words he'd spoken to me. He went straight to the point. "We're behind on rent. Amber and I need $2,000 by Friday or we're getting evicted. Can you send it today?" There it was, the reason for the call, the reason I still existed in his world. I waited for something, anything to follow. A "how are you?" A pause, a hint of guilt. Nothing came. I looked around my kitchen while he talked, my eyes landing on the same chair I'd sat in when he told me never to call again. That moment replayed itself with brutal clarity. 8 weeks earlier, I was a bother. Now, I was a solution. Something inside me shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but firmly, like a door closing. "I'm sorry," I said calmly. "I don't know who you are." There was silence on the other end. I don't have a son, and I don't help strangers. Then I hung up. My hands didn't shake, my heart didn't race. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: clarity. The phone rang again and again and again. I turned it off. I sat at the table and let the silence settle around me. It felt heavy at first, then strangely peaceful. For the first time, I wasn't bracing myself for the next crisis. I wasn't calculating what I could afford to lose. I was finally still. That night, I opened my bank statements, not to punish myself, but to understand the truth I'd been avoiding. Page after page told a story I hadn't wanted to read. Thousands sent, emergencies stacked like dominoes, always timed perfectly around my pension payments or extra shifts. I did the math. The number made my stomach drop. I hadn't been helping my son survive. I'd been financing his dependence. And if I didn't stop now, there would be nothing left. No savings, no security, no dignity. I realized something painful but necessary. Love without limits isn't love. It's permission. And I'd been giving it freely. But what happens when a mother finally says no? What happens when the silence is no longer hers, but theirs? Part 3 reveals what I discovered when I finally looked at the evidence and the question that changed everything. Stay with me. When the numbers started talking. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly in the comments. Do you believe parents owe their adult children unlimited support? Or is there a point where help turns into harm? Tell me what you think, because this next part forced me to confront that exact question. That night, after I hung up on my son, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold as I scrolled through years of bank statements. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't even sad. I was finally paying attention. Transaction after transaction stared back at me, each one tied to a familiar excuse. Just this once. Emergency. Last time, I promise. But it was never the last time. I started writing things down on a yellow notepad, not just amounts, but dates, patterns, gaps between calls, long stretches of silence followed by sudden urgency. That's when I saw it. Every single time Daniel reached out, it was tied to money. Not holidays, not birthdays, not concern for my health. Money. Over 5 years, I had sent more than I ever admitted out loud. Enough to renovate a house, enough to fund a retirement I never took, enough to keep 2 grown adults from ever learning how to stand on their own. And here I was, still living carefully, still counting grocery costs, still working past my planned retirement because they needed me. I didn't just feel used, I felt erased. I flipped through old messages on my phone, unanswered texts, read receipts with no replies, birthday messages that never came, promises to visit that were always canceled at the last minute. Then I remembered the year I broke my wrist. 6 weeks in a brace, 6 weeks of pain, 0 visits. That was the moment the truth finally landed, not as guilt, but as clarity. I wasn't being loved. I was being tolerated, as long as I provided something. I closed my laptop and sat back, staring at the ceiling, asking myself a question I should have asked years ago. When did I stop being a mother and become a resource? That's when fear crept in, not fear of losing my son, but fear of what would happen if I didn't stop now. What if I ran out of money? What if I got sick for real next time? What if I needed help and there was no one left? I realized something devastating but empowering at the same time. No one was coming to save me. I had to save myself. And that meant doing something I had avoided my entire life: setting boundaries. But here's what I want to know from you. If you were in my place, would you have kept helping? Or would you have drawn the line, even if it meant losing your child? Drop your answer in the comments because in part 4, I'll tell you what happened the moment I decided to protect myself and why that decision made everything explode. The moment I drew the line. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something, and this one isn't easy. Is protecting yourself an act of strength or betrayal? At what point does being a good parent become self-destruction? Answer in the comments because this is where everything truly changed. The next morning, I didn't wake up feeling brave. I woke up feeling terrified, but determined. For decades, my default response had been obedience disguised as love. Say yes, smooth things over, make it easier. But something inside me had hardened overnight, not into bitterness, into resolve. I picked up my purse and drove to the bank. The building looked the same as it always had, but I wasn't the same woman walking through those doors. I sat across from the banker and heard my own voice say words I'd never imagined speaking. I need to remove my son from all access to my accounts. The sentence echoed in my ears. The banker hesitated just slightly. Is everything all right? It will be, I said, and for the first time, I meant it. Paperwork followed, signatures, new PIN numbers, layers of protection I should have put in place years earlier. Every step felt heavy, but necessary, like closing a door during a storm, even when you know someone is standing outside. When I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed. Missed calls, voicemails, texts stacking on top of each other. I didn't read them. Instead, I called my friend Margaret, the one person who had watched me give and give without ever asking for anything back. When I told her what I'd done, she didn't gasp. She didn't scold me. She said, "It's about time." That was the moment I knew I wasn't crazy. Later that afternoon, I finally opened the messages. They weren't apologies. They were demands, accusations, threats, guilt wrapped in anger. And then there was a message from my daughter-in-law, cold, sharp, and revealing in ways she probably didn't intend. It said my son had wanted to cut me off years ago, that I should be grateful they kept me around. Grateful. That word hit harder than any insult. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, not with pain, but with understanding. This wasn't misunderstanding. This wasn't stress. This was intentional. I took screenshots. I saved everything. Because in that moment, I realized something crucial. If they were willing to use me emotionally, they would try to destroy me legally, and I needed to be ready. That night, I didn't cry. I made a list. Protect my finances, document everything, get advice from someone who understood situations like this. This wasn't revenge. This was survival. But here's what I want to ask you. If someone shows you clearly that they only value what you can give, do you still owe them access to your life? Or is walking away the only way to reclaim yourself? In part 5, everything escalates because once you stop giving, people who were using you don't go quietly. And that's when the real battle began. When I stopped giving, they showed their true faces. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed. Stories like this don't get told often, especially what happens after a parent finally says no. Subscribe now because this part reveals how quickly love can turn into something darker. Once the money stopped, the masks came off. At first, the messages were frantic. "Mom, answer your phone. This isn't funny. We're serious about getting evicted." Then the tone shifted. "How could you do this to us? We've always been there for you. You're being cruel." I read each message slowly, carefully, like evidence at a crime scene, because that's what it felt like now. Not family communication, but a pattern of manipulation unraveling in real time. Then came the message that changed everything. It wasn't from my son, it was from his wife. She called me bitter, ungrateful, a burden they'd only kept around out of obligation. And then she said the quiet part out loud, that Daniel had wanted to cut me off years ago, but stayed in touch because she told him to. I read it 3 times. So this was never love, it was strategy. I didn't respond. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I saved it because that single message confirmed every doubt I tried to silence for years. They weren't struggling children who needed help. They were adults who had built their lives on my guilt, and now that the supply was gone, they were panicking. That night, I made a call, not to my son, not to the police, but to someone who could help me understand my rights, someone who had seen this before, an elder law attorney. When I explained everything, she didn't sound shocked. She sounded familiar. What you're describing, she said, is financial exploitation, and when it stops, escalation is common. Escalation, that word stuck with me. She told me to document everything, save every text, every voicemail, every threat, because people who feel entitled to your resources don't simply accept boundaries, they challenge them. And she was right. The calls increased, late-night voicemails, angry accusations, warnings that I'd regret this. Then came the line that chilled me. We know where you live. That was the moment this stopped being emotional and became dangerous. I forwarded everything to my attorney. She didn't hesitate. If they show up, do not engage. Call the police. I sat in my quiet living room that night, heart steady, oddly calm, because for the first time I wasn't confused. I wasn't doubting myself. I saw the truth clearly. When you stop enabling someone, they don't miss you, they miss what you provided. And that realization hurt, but it also freed me, because love doesn't threaten, love doesn't intimidate, love doesn't demand access at the cost of your safety. But the worst part, they weren't done yet. In part 6, they show up at my house, and what happened at my front door changed everything forever. The knock at my door. I had prepared myself for anger. I had prepared myself for shouting, for accusations shouted through voicemail, for ugly words typed behind a screen. What I wasn't prepared for was the sound of my doorbell. It was late morning when it happened. I was standing in my kitchen, the house quiet, sunlight spilling across the floor like nothing in the world was wrong. Then the bell rang, sharp, deliberate. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. My body reacted before my mind did. My chest tightened, my hands went cold. But I didn't panic. I had already decided what I would do if this moment came. I called my friend Margaret and asked her to come over. I wanted a witness, someone grounded, someone who wouldn't let me fold. Then I looked through the peephole. Daniel stood on my porch, unshaven, shoulders tight with frustration. Beside him was his wife, perfectly composed, lips pressed into a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. I opened the door, but I kept the chain locked. Daniel said immediately, "Mom, we need to talk." I stayed calm. "You can say what you need to say from there." His face flushed red. "Why are you ignoring us? Why are you ignoring us?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I simply told the truth. You told me not to call you anymore. I respected that. His wife stepped forward, voice sweet, rehearsed. "Betty, let's not do this outside. We're family." Family. I almost laughed at how easily that word was used when money was involved. "You can leave," I said quietly. That's when the real confrontation began. Daniel accused me of abandoning him. His wife accused me of being selfish. They talked over each other, voices rising, frustration spilling out now that charm wasn't working. Then came the guilt. We're going to be homeless. What kind of mother lets that happen? I looked at my son, really looked at him. A grown man, healthy, capable, angry that the safety net had disappeared. What kind of son tells his mother not to call him and then shows up demanding money? I asked. Silence fell, heavy and awkward. That's when I told them something they didn't expect. I've documented everything. Bank records, messages, threats, every dollar I'd given over the years, every ignored call, every manipulative text. When I mentioned my attorney, their confidence shattered. His wife's smile vanished. Daniel's voice dropped. "You got a lawyer?" asked Daniel. "Yes," I said, "to protect myself." That word, protect, hit harder than any insult. They left not long after that, furious, humiliated, threatening consequences as they walked back to their car. I closed the door and leaned against it, my knees shaking, not from fear, but from the release of something I'd carried for far too long. I had stood my ground, but I didn't yet understand how far they were willing to go, because in Part 7, they make their most dangerous move yet, one that could have taken everything from me. Stay with me. The move that nearly destroyed me. I thought the confrontation at my front door was the worst it could get. I was wrong. A few days after they showed up, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Peace had become my new habit, but something told me to answer. "Mrs. Patterson?" the woman asked, her voice professional, measured. "This is Karen from Adult Protective Services." My stomach dropped. She explained that a report had been filed by my son claiming I was no longer capable of managing my finances, that I was confused, vulnerable, being manipulated. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. This wasn't desperation anymore. This was war. If that report succeeded, Daniel could gain control over my accounts, my home, my life. Everything I had worked for could be handed back to the very people I was trying to protect myself from. But fear only lasted a second. Then clarity took over. "I'm fully competent," I said calmly, "and I believe this report is part of an ongoing harassment and financial exploitation." There was a pause. Then Karen said something that surprised me. "Would you be willing to meet in person?" "Yes," I replied, "and my attorney will be present." That night, I didn't sleep, but not because I was afraid. I prepared. I organized every document I had, medical records confirming my mental health, bank statements showing years of one-way financial support, screenshots of threatening messages, character references from friends and former colleagues. When Karen arrived the next morning, she wasn't cold or suspicious. She was attentive. She asked about my daily routine, my finances, my health, my relationship with my son. I answered every question clearly, steadily, without emotion. Facts don't need anger. When I showed her the messages, especially the ones revealing why Daniel had kept contact, her expression changed. She nodded slowly. By the end of the meeting, she looked me in the eye and said, "You are of sound mind, and what you're describing does raise serious concerns." 2 days later, she called again. The report against me was closed, but a new one had been opened. Against them for financial exploitation and harassment. When I hung up, I didn't celebrate. I exhaled, because the truth had finally caught up with them. But exposing someone doesn't stop them. It enrages them. That evening, my voicemail filled with threats, accusations, promises that I'd pay for this. I saved every message and sent them straight to my attorney. And that's when she told me something chilling. People who get cornered don't calm down, they escalate. She was right, because in Part 8, the consequences finally arrive, and they're not the ones Daniel expected. Don't miss what happens next. When consequences finally arrived, the silence after the investigation felt different, not peaceful, not calm, heavy, like the quiet before something irreversible. For weeks, I heard nothing from Daniel or his wife. No calls, no messages, no surprise visits. Part of me hoped, foolishly, that they had finally understood, that the reality check had done what years of conversations never could. But people who survive on manipulation don't change overnight. They just change tactics. The first sign came in the mail, a certified envelope addressed to Daniel and his wife, but sent to my house. I didn't open it. I called my attorney immediately. Photograph it. Mark return to sender. Don't engage. But the return address said everything I needed to know. Eviction court. The truth hit me harder than I expected. They hadn't just been struggling, they had been lying. That afternoon, Daniel showed up alone. No charm, no anger, just desperation. He looked smaller somehow, thinner. His eyes darted like an animal searching for an exit. "We're on the street," he said. "We have nowhere to go." I kept the chain on the door. "This is not my emergency," I replied. His voice cracked. "You're really going to let this happen?" "Yes," I said, "because this didn't start when I stopped helping. It started when you stopped taking responsibility." He accused me of ruining his life, of abandoning me, of choosing money over family. But for the first time, I didn't absorb it. I asked him one simple question. Where did the $63,000 go? He had no answer. That silence was louder than any argument. He left furious, broken, unrecognizable from the child I once held. Weeks later, the truth surfaced. The police contacted my attorney. Fraud. Multiple credit cards opened in my name, tens of thousands in debt, payments made with my money. That's why the requests never stopped. That's why they always needed more. The investigation moved quickly. Arrests followed. I should have felt grief. Instead, I felt confirmation. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't exaggerated. I hadn't overreacted. I had been exploited. And stopping didn't destroy my family. It exposed it. When the court cleared me of all responsibility, I sat at my kitchen table and cried, not from sadness, but from release. The weight was gone, the guilt was gone, and for the first time in years, the future felt like mine again. But the story doesn't end with punishment, because in Part 9, I'll tell you what happened when the dust settled and how choosing myself changed everything. Stay with me. After the fall, I finally breathed. When everything finally stopped, the calls, the threats, the chaos, I didn't know what to do with the quiet. For years, my life had revolved around waiting for the next crisis, the next request, the next moment I'd be needed. When that cycle ended, it felt almost unnatural, like stepping off a moving train. At first, I felt empty. Not because I missed the pain, but because I had built my identity around being useful to someone who never planned to value me. Then something unexpected happened. I started living. I slept through the night for the first time in years. No late-night voicemails, no anxiety over my phone lighting up. I woke up rested, actually rested, and realized how tired I had been for so long without noticing. I filled my days slowly, intentionally. I joined a book club at the local library. At first, I barely spoke. I just listened. Stories, laughter, people who showed up without needing anything from me. It felt unfamiliar and safe. I volunteered at an animal shelter, quiet work, honest work, creatures that responded to care without manipulation. There was something healing in that. My house changed too. It stopped feeling like a waiting room. I moved furniture, let in more light, took down photos that carried more pain than joy. In their place, I added new memories, small ones, but real. The guilt still whispered sometimes. What kind of mother cuts off her child? What kind of woman chooses peace over blood? But every time those thoughts surfaced, I reminded myself of the truth. I didn't cut him off. I stopped bleeding. My attorney kept me updated on the legal side of things, but I didn't follow every detail. I didn't need to. Knowing that I was safe, financially, legally, emotionally, was enough. And then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. Handwritten. Daniel. I didn't open it right away. I held it in my hands for a long time, weighing years of love against years of damage. When I finally read it, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not hope, understanding. He wrote about regret, about consequences, about finally realizing what responsibility meant when no one was there to rescue him. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just wrote. I didn't reply, not because I hated him, but because healing doesn't mean reopening old wounds before they've closed. For the first time, I was choosing myself without guilt. And that choice changed everything. Because in part 10, I'll share how my life began to rebuild in ways I never imagined, and why losing one role allowed me to rediscover who I really was. Stay with me. Losing one life to build another. When you spend decades living for someone else, you forget who you are when they're gone. I didn't realize how much of myself I had buried under motherhood until there was finally space to breathe. At first, that space felt terrifying, too quiet, too open, too unfamiliar. But slowly, something unexpected happened. I started to enjoy it. I enrolled in a painting class at the community center. It wasn't about talent or results. It was about showing up for myself without guilt. My first painting was awkward, the colors clashing, the lines unsure, but it was mine. No one needed it, no one judged it, and for the first time in years, I felt free to make mistakes without consequences. Then I turned my attention to my home. For years, my house had felt like a waiting room, frozen in time, prepared for people who never came. I rearranged the furniture, let in more light, took down photos that brought more pain than comfort. In their place, I put up new memories, friends at dinner, a sunny afternoon in the garden, laughter captured without expectation. Speaking of the garden, that became my quiet therapy. I planted vegetables, herbs, flowers, things that required patience but gave back honestly. Watching something grow because I cared for it, not because it demanded care, was deeply healing. It reminded me that effort isn't supposed to disappear into a void. My finances changed too. For the first time in years, my savings account grew instead of shrinking. No emergencies, no sudden transfers, no anxiety every time the phone rang. I planned a trip, something small but meaningful, just because I could, and no one tried to take it from me. I also started saying yes to invitations, coffee dates, walks, book club discussions that lasted longer than the meeting itself. I met people who knew me as Betty, not someone's mother, not the one who helps, but simply me. And something else happened, something I didn't expect. I began laughing again. Real laughter, the kind that surprises you, the kind that doesn't come with guilt afterward. I wasn't heartless. I still thought about my son. I still wished things had been different, but I finally understood something crucial. Loving someone does not mean sacrificing yourself until there's nothing left. I didn't lose my purpose when I stopped enabling. I found a new one built on peace, on choice, on dignity. And just when I thought life had settled into this new rhythm, another chapter arrived, one that tested whether my boundaries were truly strong. In part 11, I'll tell you what happened when the past tried to pull me back and why this time I didn't break. When the past tried to pull me back. Just when life began to feel steady, the past reached out again. Not with anger, not with demands, with guilt. It arrived quietly, disguised as concern, one of the most dangerous forms of manipulation. The letter came from the prison. Daniel. I recognized his handwriting immediately. My hands didn't shake this time, but my heart did slow down, like it was bracing for impact. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the kitchen counter and walked away, letting it sit there for hours. Because healing had taught me something important. You don't have to respond to everything that reaches for you. When I finally read it, the tone was different. No accusations, no entitlement, just remorse. Carefully worded, heavy with reflection. He wrote about responsibility, about consequences, about realizing too late what he had taken for granted. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for help. He asked for understanding. And for a moment, the old version of me stirred, the mother who rushed in to soothe, to fix, to absorb the pain so her child wouldn't have to. But I paused. Because empathy without boundaries is how I lost myself before. I showed the letter to my attorney, then to Margaret. Both said the same thing in different words. You can feel compassion without reopening the door. That distinction mattered more than anything, so I made a choice. I didn't write back, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. Some conversations are necessary for closure. Others are invitations back into chaos. This one felt like the latter. Instead, I focused on the life I had built, the one grounded in calm, not crisis. I kept attending my classes. I kept tending my garden. I kept choosing peace over nostalgia. And then something unexpected happened. I stopped feeling responsible for his healing. That burden had never been mine to carry. Weeks passed, then months. The letter remained in a drawer, not as a wound, but as proof of how far I'd come. Because growth isn't loud. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like restraint. And sometimes it looks like refusing to reopen doors that nearly destroyed you. But the story wasn't over yet. Because in part 12, I'll tell you how this journey reshaped my understanding of family and why chosen bonds can be stronger than blood. Stay with me. The family I chose. For most of my life, I believed family was something you were born into, fixed, unchangeable, unquestionable. You endured it. You sacrificed for it. You excused things you'd never tolerate from anyone else. But after everything that happened, that belief began to crack. Because when I finally stopped pouring myself into a relationship that only took, something remarkable happened. Other people stepped in. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, out of choice. Margaret became more than a friend. She became my anchor. The person who showed up without needing an invitation, the one who checked in not to ask for anything, but simply to ask how I was doing. My book club turned into a circle of understanding I never knew I needed. Story after story surfaced, different details, same pain. Adult children who crossed boundaries, parents who mistook endurance for love. We weren't broken, we were learning. I fostered an elderly cat named Barnaby, abandoned, quiet, cautious. He trusted slowly. So did I. In caring for him, I realized how much I'd learned about patience, gentleness, and mutual respect. Care should never feel like a transaction. It should feel safe. I even started dating, not seriously, not dramatically, coffee dates, walks, conversations with someone who laughed easily and never once asked me to prove my worth by giving something away. For the first time, I was seen as a person, not a provider, and that changed how I understood family. Family wasn't about who shared my blood, it was about who respected my boundaries, who listened when I spoke, who didn't disappear when I stopped giving. I no longer felt ashamed of choosing myself. In fact, I felt proud. Because love that demands self-erasure isn't love, it's control. And love that survives only when you're useful isn't love either, it's dependence. The bonds I built now were balanced, mutual, honest. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Belonging, without fear. But there was still one final chapter left, one last truth to confront. Because in part 13, I'll share what I've learned about motherhood, forgiveness, and the strength it takes to finally say no and ask you the question that matters most. Stay with me for the ending. The line I drew and the life I found. For a long time, I believed being a good mother meant endless sacrifice. It meant saying yes when I wanted to say no. It meant absorbing pain quietly. It meant confusing endurance with love. But now, standing on the other side of this journey, I understand something I wish I had learned sooner. Being a good mother does not mean destroying yourself. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for your child is to stop rescuing them from the consequences of their choices. I didn't stop loving my son. I stopped enabling him. Those two things are not the same. For years, I feared that setting boundaries would make me cold, selfish, or cruel. But what it actually made me was honest. Honest about what I could give. Honest about what I deserved. Honest about the fact that love should never require silence, fear, or financial ruin. Do I forgive him? Yes, but forgiveness didn't come as a reunion or a reconciliation. It came as release. I forgave him so I could stop carrying anger, so I could move forward without bitterness weighing me down. Forgiveness does not mean access, and forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means choosing peace. Motherhood taught me how to give. This chapter taught me how to protect, and both lessons matter. Today, my life is quiet, but it's full. Full of people who choose me, full of moments that don't come with conditions, full of a version of myself I almost lost trying to be everything for someone else. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. You are allowed to draw a line, even with family, even with your children, especially when love is being used as a weapon against you. Now I want to ask you, was I wrong to say no? What would you have done in my place? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might help someone else find the courage to choose themselves. And if this story resonated with you, consider subscribing, because none of us are alone in these battles, and sometimes hearing the truth is the first step toward healing. Thank you for listening.